This episode of Total Network Operations is brought to you by CatchPoint. CatchPoint is an internet performance monitoring platform that gives you visibility into everything that impacts your applications from the end user's experience and perspective, giving you outside-in visibility. It's the platform for internet plumbers. CatchPoint provides internet performance monitoring, IPM, which is observability for your internet stack. CatchPoint does all this with telemetry from the world's largest, most diverse observability network. It helps us plumbers in enterprise IT, DevOps, IT ops, and all sorts of NetOps teams find incident root cause and identify blind spots. This means improved mean time to resolution by monitoring from where your users are. Total Network Operations listeners can explore the CatchPoint platform today at catchpoint.com/totalnetops. That's catchpoint.com/totalnetops. Now, let's get to the show. Welcome to Total Network Operations, the project with a podcast that's dedicated to hardworking network operators like you who deliver all the packets. Here on TNOps, we give operators and technology providers time to talk about their great ideas in NetOps so you can make informed decisions for your network and your team, and to spur more constructive and direct dialogue between those tech suppliers and NetOps teams. I'm your host, Scott Robon. Today's show, we're going to focus on our interaction with carriers and service providers, and to spend some time with one particular modern service provider. You already know their name. You read the show description, but we'll get to that in a second. Some of you out there work for carriers and service providers, and you know how complex things can be, especially at scale, and the pressure that can be put on NetOps teams. You're providing a service. That's how your company monetizes itself. There's a lot of pressure in being in an ops role there. A big part of my growing up in networking was dealing with very large mission critical networks in the government and the carrier space. And I worked for a carrier for a time. It really gave me this fascination for industrial strength networking and everything that goes into it, all the history, the tech, the processes, 5 nines reliability. I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go through here, and other telco heritage type concepts. I feel like these were the girders, the I-beams, and the concrete of networking, kind of really helping me develop a blue collar, broad shoulders view of network infrastructure. Others of us, you listening, have had interactions with carriers that have been really frustrating. Frustration with how long it takes to get services ordered and then provisioned, and then troubleshooting issues with your carrier, your SP, and circuit issues can just drive you crazy. Many of you have heard the phrase, we didn't change anything in the network at some point. That's probably true in many cases. But we've all had the thought that, man, wouldn't it be great if I could get these circuits, these connections provisioned faster, and I could get troubles resolved more rapidly? Well, if that's you, we've got a show for you today. Today's guests definitely have some thoughts on these issues. I want to welcome to us today Alexis Berthoff, Global Technical Evangelist, and Mitchell Warden, Founding Engineer, both with Megaport. Megaport is a network as a service provider worldwide that has built over 800 data centers. I bet that number's gone up, all across the globe, with rapid self-service provisioning systems that can have you up and running in minutes. Yes, I just said minutes. Mitch, Alexis, it's great to have you both here today. Tell us about yourself, your history, and what led to your roles at Megaport. Why don't we ask Alexis to go first?
Sure. Well, Scott, it's great to be here. I am a little bit newer to the company. I just joined Megaport here in October of last year. So I think I'm hitting about the 6-month mark now. But I am like you said, global technical evangelist. I sit in between sales, marketing, product, and the customers. So really trying to help everyone work a little bit better together.
Very cool. Mitch, how about you?
Hi, Scott. I'm founding engineer and architect at Megaport. I've been here since the very beginning, day one. I'm primarily responsible for the network automation systems, and I have a pretty big involvement in the technical product design as well.
Very good. Well, I think you both bring things to the table that we want to talk about today. Before we dive in, I just want to give a little tip of the hat to a community member, Daniel Dibb. Daniel had some questions he wanted worked into this, and those are sprinkled throughout the discussion today. So, Daniel, we're looking at you. Thank you for your input on this. So let's go to the origins of Megaport. And Mitch, you're the tenured individual here. why don't you start us? And let me just reference, there's a great companion episode on packet pushers to this episode today, back from February 25 with Cameron Daniel, the CTO of Megaport. He talked a lot about the what. We want to talk more about the how today. So, Mitch, let me pass it to you.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so the core idea of Megaport was really to build an automated network right from the beginning. We knew that we wanted to have a self-service portal and to provide internet exchange services and data center interconnect services. It was a really interesting opportunity, I think, for Cam and myself. The chance to start something new and sort of fix all those problems that we'd seen at other places we'd worked.
Sure.
That was really exciting. Yeah, and there was just a handful of people in the company at the start, like less than 10 people, and only really 2 of us working on the network automation. So yeah, we had this pretty crazy goal at the beginning there to build our first 6 locations and 3 internet exchanges in just 6 weeks.
And how close did you come to that goal?
Yeah, I think it was about 3 months. We made a lot of progress in 6 weeks. I think we had some kit installed, but yeah, we turned on the first customer in about 3 months.
That's that's 6 weeks to 12, 13 weeks. I'll allow it. That's not a problem. But that's pretty amazing, no matter what metrics you go by there. So pretty cool.
We were happy with it, and we managed to get even that very first service was deployed with a little bit of automation. So just the very first automation that we ever had.
So what were the biggest pain points? You said you were excited about doing something new. What were some of the biggest issues that you felt like we can do this better, starting with a clean slate?
Yeah, we both worked for like small carriers and telcos. I think we had a little database, and it was maybe ahead of its time, but it left a lot to be desired. We couldn't get it to the point where it was reliable enough, where the data was good enough to actually generate and push config to the network. But it had planted a seed in our minds of what was possible, and so that was sort of the biggest thing that we set out to solve was how can we get this database to the point where we can use it to just track everything about the network. And yeah, I think in the early days, something that we struggled a lot with on that was the vendor equipment didn't have much in the way of automatable features. We were still pretty stuck on command line interfaces for configuring things. And
why do it any other way? I've always said, I got my CCIE, right? I've memorized all these commands. Sorry, I've got my JNCIE. I memorized all these commands. Yep. So, yeah. Keep going.
Yeah. So, and things have moved on a lot since then. But yeah, that was how we did it in the early days. Was with just automating the CLI. I think, yeah, I haven't worked for like a really big carrier before, but I've been a customer of big carriers for quite a long time, and I've definitely experienced those slow provisioning times and sometimes frustrating moments there. And to be fair, you sometimes get that from small carriers as well. But I'm sure that there's a lot of debt there, not just technical debt, but organizational debt. They've been around for a long time, most of them. They've been big for a long time, and so they just have a lot of process, even for small things.
I definitely think in North America, at least, we have the Bell system heritage, right? That has strong positives and some strong negatives too, right? And having process and driving circuit level reliability was really important in the early phases of communications deployment. But then, as cloud models came along and we were able to focus on service availability versus circuit availability, you have lots more fungibility with the infrastructure if you're worried about keeping the service up versus any individual circuit up. So.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Yeah, and I think that's something that, a lot of the cloud providers push that kind of thing really heavily,
Right.
and that flows down into our services a little bit as well. We work a lot with the cloud providers, and
Sure.
and yeah, the ability to turn it on and off really quickly makes a big difference to how you treat them, I think. Um,
For sure.
and I think the carriers would still benefit from a lot of network automation. I'm sure they want to. Um, I think they just have a lot of legacy. There's a lot of variation in their services, and
I
so
think
it's quite difficult to try and automate that all in one go.
I
Sure.
think, Mitch, that was one of the first questions I asked when I came to Megaport. I was like, if we're doing this, why don't all of the carriers do it too? Right? You'd think they already have everything laid out. It's really more of a paper process to get everything pushed through. Why don't they just automate it? And I think it was Cam, he was like, they can't because their network wasn't designed for it. And the difference is that because we built in all of the automation, this is how we built the network, is what makes it so different.
Yeah, I'd even say we didn't necessarily automate everything day one. That's a huge task.
Sure.
But what we did was we thought about how we would automate it, and we we stuck to those design principles. And so later on, when something needed to be automated that maybe we didn't automate at the beginning, it was easier because it was consistent. Even though we didn't automate it, we'd still kept it in the database, or we'd made sure that every box was configured the same way.
Sure. It's interesting to me, you started out by saying one of the biggest problems you wanted to tackle was an accurate, high fidelity, stable database of all the network infrastructure and bits. And it's very like out of the gate, you weren't saying we were trying to solve these customer pain points. You wanted to get the infrastructure right. Can you speak to that a little bit and then talk about how you went and decided, okay, where do you start automating certain things, not doing everything at once?
Yeah, well, I think certainly at a product level, we obviously do want to solve customer pain points, but
Sure.
I think one of the ways we do that is by providing like building blocks and making them simple, and that
Hmm.
that kind of comes back to how we automate it. So if we can provide a few simple services that it can be automated, that you can then put together in different ways, then you can solve a lot of different problems, and maybe we haven't even thought of all those problems.
Sure.
And so that was a big key to how we did our automation, was kind of designing the products in a way that they were individually pretty simple and automatable.
Did you have any real structured process of like, let's do the small things that we have to do 125 times a day, right? Or how did you pick the low hanging fruit?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we started out doing was pretty much, I guess we have this concept of like base config on the routers, and if we just talk about router config for a second,
Sure.
there's base config on the router. This is things that like don't really change. So
Right.
you can add and remove services, and that stuff is the same. So those things, like we didn't automate that right away. That was just a template that got put on the router at the beginning, and we kind of never touched it again.
Right.
And so that's like a simple thing, and so we just put the things that varied in the database, the things that needed to be altered on the fly,
Okay.
and that was enough. But we kept the knowledge of the infrastructure, and I think that was probably the very first thing that ever went in the database was a list of the locations and the routers and the
Sure.
management IP address and that kind of thing. And with that, obviously you can build a lot around that. And over time we have built a lot around that. We have many small services that read that information and make decisions about how to manage the network.
You have Legos, right? And you can build the Millennium Falcon, or the Star Destroyer out of those Legos if you'd like. You can pick,
Exactly.
whichever, if you're with the Jedi or the Empire, right? Sorry, I went to Star Wars too quickly here, but well, from Alexis, you're talking to customers, right? What are the things you're running into in terms of addressing those pain points that you've seen helped by automation in the infrastructure?
Yeah, I think number one, we've touched on this a bit, but just time to deployment. especially when we have customers connecting to multiple clouds or multiple data centers. It's not always feasible for them to
Right.
wait 6+ weeks, 6+ months in order to get a
Sure.
circuit established. And on top of that, cloud strategy can turn on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
We see customers pivoting into different clouds, especially with AI. It's kind of the Wild West out there right now. And so no one really wants to be locked into this long-term contract where they're waiting for the service and now they're committed to using the service and it's extremely expensive. And so that's the number one thing, right? Like a lot of customers just say, I didn't know this existed. I didn't know you could do this. Thank God I found you guys.
Right.
And just how easy it is to use.
So, in that portal or configuration, right? I mean, that's got to be key to firing off automations and orchestrating, I think, probably things that have to happen in a row, right, to turn on certain services. What does that connective tissue look like, Mitch?
Yeah, so the portal is definitely the main interface, and we spend a lot of time trying to make it very friendly, and sometimes we even maybe don't implement a feature if we can't make it nice in the portal. Um, in terms of the stack, there's a few layers there. So obviously the portal is a single page app, runs in the browser.
Yep.
And we have an API layer underneath, and the API pretty much allows you to do everything that you can do in the portal. There's documentation for that, and customers use that to go further and actually automate their own networks using our network as well. So you've got that API layer. We've also got Terraform, which is another interface which uses the API. And so it's a very, very popular way for customers to integrate their cloud networks and even their regular on-premise networks. So that's the kind of the public-facing side of it.
Sure.
Internally, that there's a selection, I guess, of internal APIs behind that, and they do things like billing and all the service management. But probably the main important one is what we would call the network API. And so if you order a service through the portal, it goes to the public API, and then that figures out what components are required in the network and makes requests to the network API. The network API will take care of allocating resources to that service and reserving ports or whatever is needed, and ultimately getting configuration pushed out to the network and monitoring systems and things like that.
And that's got to depend on the database, right? If I'm looking connectivity between Sydney and LA, right? And then I've got to interrogate the database to figure out what infrastructure is available between there and what services I can support between those locations.
That's right. Yeah. So the database holds all that information about the infrastructure, how much capacity there is, how much is used, and so a big part of what we do in the network automation, and we kind of talked about the provisioning side of things, but before you can do the provisioning, you've got to have all the infrastructure in the database.
Right.
And so we spend a fair while making internal tooling for our deployment teams and the other operations teams to be able to interrogate that and update it and make sure that it's kept in sync with what's physically installed.
Do you have trouble with drift? Like you find things that somebody will do something in the field and it doesn't get logged appropriately? Not trying to get anybody in trouble.
A little, not. It's really not too bad, I think, because there's almost no way to get anything in the network without it being in the database first.
Smart.
Nobody puts any configuration on routers manually. The only way to get the configuration for a device, or to get an IP address assigned for it, for instance, is to put it in the database and have the system assign it. And so, yeah, you can't get very far if you try to do things, around the automation, I guess.
Sure. You mentioned earlier on about some of the initial challenges you had with interfaces with vendor supplied routers, right? And just not having, something other than the CLI or a robust API to actually get stuff done. What were your interactions like with those vendors to get what you needed? were you able to drive requirements? And like Alexis and I both know what that's like coming from product companies, right? It's always easy. They always want to give you what you want tomorrow, right? I mean, I'm sure you had no trouble getting requirements and features implemented.
Yeah, I think they definitely want to help because I think they see benefit in the automation and being able to sell more boxes at the end of the day. But yes, getting actual software features out the door and into a release, we definitely struggle with that quite a lot. And we've been told by vendors that we're one of only a couple of companies in the world that are doing the type of automation that we're doing, and that makes it hard because there's a commercial pressure on them. They need to support thousands of customers. So if there's only two companies asking for it, you might not get it.
Depends on how big those two companies are, right? But yeah, that can be a challenge, right? And especially when it's operations related stuff, right? Segment routing, and all the the latest cool features in BGP tend to get more attention than what makes this more operable, for me as a network operator. So, did
I think
you feel
it was definitely pretty clear to us that some of the vendors had really designed the software with the automation in mind from the beginning, and some hadn't. Some had bolted it on the side, and that it was pretty obvious. It makes a big difference in when you're using it and trying to actually automate against it. And we have abandoned products because the automation just was not reliable enough. Yeah.
That's what Mitch. That's what I was going to ask. Which also, this is a real treat because Mitch and I sit almost 12 hours apart, so we don't get to chat very often. I feel like I'm getting a little history lesson. But that's exactly what I was going to ask: was did we choose certain vendors over others, just based on how they did their automation?
Yeah, it's a big factor. Yeah, I think it's changed a lot in the last 10 years. But it's definitely more front of mind. Pretty much everyone has some sort of automation strategy now, and it pretty much just comes down to how well executed it is. And yeah, we're still dealing with a few that are trying to, backfill the automation into an existing product, and it doesn't work as well.
Yeah. I also get the sense that like some of your like your service entry points, like the MCR, correct? That's the Megaport Cloud Router. Is that natively developed by you all from the ground up, or are you using a vendor product for that?
We have a vendor product under the hood for that.
Okay.
Yeah, but we've actually changed vendors on that twice in the history of that product.
Wow.
And a large part of that was to get better automation capabilities, as well as other things like performance and things like that. Yeah.
Sure. And it's not easy to change horses in midstream on stuff like that. So
yeah, it's a big job for sure. But I think it kind of touches on something I said earlier, which is about keeping the products in these sort of relatively simple building blocks.
Sure.
And so we've been able to do that without really any visibility. The customers don't necessarily even see that, because we can implement the same features pretty much exactly the same way on a different platform.
Gotcha. What else comes from customers, Alexis, where they ask questions about the MCR? How do I use it? Why can't I SSH into it? Why do I have to point and click? Is that a net benefit from a customer perspective? What do you think?
I haven't had anyone complain about it so far, honestly. Yeah. I do think it is on the roadmap, some CLI capability, if I'm not mistaken, Mitch, or is that just getting more logs from them?
There's definitely more operational output that we want to make available, but we probably won't give direct access to the CLI.
Yeah, my introduction to MCR was, if someone's asking what this is, it's baby's first router. It's very simple. There's not a ton to it. But if you need something to route in between two clouds, here you go.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and we kind of have the other product, the MVE. If you need to have every option that the router has available to you, and you're happy to configure it yourself, and you need the CLI, then MVE is a great option for that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you do support CLI on the MVE product?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So MVE, you can host your vendor's router or firewall. So whether that's Cisco, Palo, Fortinet, what have you, you can put that on our hardware. That way you can manage it in line with the rest of your environment. So it's almost like you can have one of your own firewalls at our edge and then route through our backbone, but you get to manage all of the policy and everything from one place. So it just depends on what you're looking for.
Let me pull this back to like getting that entry point at a Megaport POP. Sometimes you're not in that data center and you need a tail circuit, and you just have to rely on local facilities, local providers to actually get connectivity to Megaport. Am I reading that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Although we're in a large number of data centers, not every customer has is in one of them. Yep.
Right.
Sometimes
Yep.
they need a tail to get to us. Yeah.
Yep. And that's obviously out of your control from a provisioning perspective, and probably even a troubleshooting perspective.
Largely, yes. I would encourage you to speak to us, because sometimes there's something we can do. Maybe there is demand in another data center, but yeah, we can help a little bit. With things like ordering cross connects in the data center to reach your tail provider, for instance. That's something that you can order in our portal. But yeah, the main thing is to get that connectivity there, and once you've got that port in the data center up and running, everything else is by the minute, easily orderable in the portal.
Yeah, the other thing we've seen a lot, we've had customers say if you're connecting in from a branch and you can just use the internet to get to one of our data centers, where we really sit is for middle mile connectivity, right? That's where our bread and butter is, where our global backbone is. And a lot of customers are kind of hesitant to use the internet, so they'll set it up while they wait for a circuit. But because you're only going that short distance into your local data center, the performance is so negligible. Half the time they end up canceling the circuit because they don't need it.
That must be gratifying to see that happen. And it makes the customer happy, for sure.
Right.
Mitch, you made a comment a minute ago about visibility, and I heard Cam speak quite a bit about the ability to get telemetry and info, onto the enterprise side or the customer side. Can you speak to what you support there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So all of the products, we provide some logs on the service, the status of things, alerting, graphs for utilization and errors and things like that. That's all available in the portal. You can use the APIs to get that information. We've got a trial going on at the moment for a Prometheus or Open Metrics endpoint. So customers that have their own monitoring system can pull in that data. But there's always more, So I think the MCR and the MVEs being a little bit more complicated. There's a bit more going on there. So those are probably areas that we would like to focus on a bit more. So this would be, I'm sure Cam would have talked about things like maybe streaming telemetry or BMP data for BGP route data. Yeah, even just some more alerting. There's a bit going on there, right? There's lots of BGP sessions on these things typically. What have we got? We've also got there's a BGP looking glass for the MCR, so you can check the routing table and do things like that. But there's always more we can add to that.
This episode of Total Network Operations is brought to you by CatchPoint. CatchPoint is an internet performance monitoring platform that gives you visibility into everything that impacts your applications from the end user's experience and perspective, giving you outside-in visibility. It's the platform for internet plumbers, a term I've used on this show many times. CatchPoint performs internet performance monitoring, or IPM, providing observability for your internet stack. Catchpoint does all this with telemetry from the world's largest, most diverse observability network. That network contains thousands of locations across hundreds of countries and highly diverse locations, like cloud nodes at the source of applications, backbone and broadband nodes, and last mile locations where user experiences occur. The need for this type of monitoring was reinforced by Gartner's first ever Gartner Magic Quadrant for digital experience monitoring. Catchpoint helps us plumbers in enterprise IT, DevOps, IT ops, and all types of NetOps teams find incident root cause, as well as identify blind spots from the evolution of internet-centric application delivery. In our distributed app world, we need to see the data from everywhere. This means improved mean time to resolution by monitoring from where your users are and less finger pointing. I spent a lot of time in one of my early NetOps jobs showing how it wasn't the network's fault. I really could have used tools like this to save me time and effort proving network innocence. Total Network Operations listeners can explore the Catchpoint platform today at catchpoint.com/totalnetops. That's catchpoint.com/totalnetops. I had a great conversation with the Catchpoint team in Total Network Operations episode 28. Give that episode a listen to hear much more about what they do. Thank you, Catchpoint, for your support of Total Network Operations. Let's get back to the show. So from an ops perspective, like that's pretty transparent, right? You're, providing the end customer with performance information and what's happening in the interior of the network. And we use the broad label network as a service or NAS, right? But, this isn't just an SD-WAN play, right? Where people want to set it and forget it. And you probably have some more sophisticated customers if they're doing special things with BGP and so forth. Do you see a range of customer maturity, customer capability, or do they tend toward the more I want to know everything that's going on types?
Oh yeah, there's a big range. Yeah, I think particularly MCR sort of encourages a little bit more on the customers that just want something simple, but customers change over time as well, right? Sometimes they start simple, they think they need something simple, and then their requirements change.
Right.
And so even on the MCR, there's always somebody who wants more. There's no end of feature requests, and I think I mentioned earlier, we try to be very careful about how much complexity we put into it because we want it to be easy, and so. Yeah, sometimes the answer is to use a different product like MVE, and sometimes it's something that we can add in. And we're constantly adding new features. There's a pretty big push on MCR features at the moment.
Do you have an active process for soliciting requirements from your customers? How do I get something into the MCR roadmap?
Yep. So obviously, customers spend a fair bit of time in the portal. So there is a feedback form in the portal.
Sure.
And I'm sure people think that might go nowhere, but that goes pretty much straight to the engineers, right? So we see that feedback from every customer, and we definitely take that on board. If you need something immediately, or you want to talk to somebody, then I would say probably talking to the solutions architect or through the sales team is probably the best way there.
Sure.
I will say there is a pretty small feedback loop here.
Okay.
Coming from a 80,000 person company to a little under 400 person company.
Really?
There's not so many layers in between the sales team and the product team as there are other places. So if you have a feature request and you call your SA, it's going straight to Mitch.
Got it. He clicks when they click send in the portal, maybe there's no filter. Maybe he sees them all and he's just not telling you. So,
I think I do see them all, actually.
Mention camera CC.
I'm not surprised. Yeah. Wow. 400 or just under 400 people. I would have assumed more like 1,000. So, this is not a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Can you speak to economies of scale, having that emphasis on automating what you can all the way from the beginning? Probably never put you in a situation where, well, now we're using automation so we can reduce staff. But it probably helped people do more with less. Speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, there was a time where we ran the whole network with just 3 people.
Seriously, that's
It's
not just from my notes here. Are you running the whole network with 3 people? Literally, that's in my notes.
there was a time, yeah.
Okay, all right.
So
Not
we
anymore, though.
we
Not
actually
anymore. Yeah.
not anymore, unfortunately. No. Yeah, we did find, we didn't need as many people as what we'd worked with in previous companies. Absolutely,
Right.
And there was it was both a happy and a sad day when we had to hire, a bit more of an operations team, because
Mm-hmm.
we kind of thought that we might even be able to just run this whole thing without anybody providing support for the network,
Right.
and but of course that doesn't work forever. Eventually, you get
Right.
customers, and customers want someone to talk to, so you really have to. But um, it has definitely made a big difference, and I would say that we have more software people than we have network people,
Sure.
um, and a lot of our network people spend most of their time writing software.
Sure.
So yeah, it's certainly highly automated, and that has made a big difference. I think an area that maybe we haven't done enough, or maybe it's just very difficult to automate. This probably comes down to like the troubleshooting, um, when there's vendor bugs or complicated customer problems. It's just not much you can do there, or at least we
Right.
haven't found a way yet.
Well, so what is that balance of automation versus I got to get in the CLI to really figure this out? Um, you know, percentages again, it's really hard to assign. Is it 80% automated, 20% human driven? One command at a time. How would you characterize that?
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, I've mentioned like all of our device configurations, any changes, that's
Hmm.
100% automated. There's no
Okay,
manual configuration changes on the network. Um, when it comes to troubleshooting, there's a lot more manual. But whether or not somebody has to actually go on the CLI, yeah, that's a thing. So we we try to provide web interfaces or scripts that can do more than one thing. That can aggregate a bunch of information, maybe make some decisions, or provide some output that is harder to get from the CLI. And hopefully those things are enough. And obviously this all comes after if it's a customer issue, after the customer has already used what tools are available to them in the portal.
sure.
Um, uh, and and yeah, so I think it's probably whether or not you need to go on the CLI. I don't know. It's really hard to assign a percentage. I would think
Yeah.
that probably the network people are going on the CLI probably still more than half the time
Okay.
for issues that they think might be configuration on the router or something like that. But I don't think it's necessarily because they have to. I think there's a familiarity aspect to that as well,
Sure.
um, and that's something that'll probably change over time as we automate more.
Do you have a particular automation framework that you stick with? Is it something that you picked up somewhere else or you've developed it internally? How does that interaction with Terraform, getting configs to devices? What internal tools can you speak to?
Yeah, so our system is pretty much entirely built in house. We pretty much still use the same core idea that we had since the beginning of Megaport. And in 2013-14, when we really started all this, there just wasn't a lot of options out there.
Sure.
So we pretty much had to make it ourselves. And yeah, so we have our own system. Uh, as I mentioned, we have the database as the source of truth,
Hmm.
and we have a multitude, probably more than 50 small applications that surround that do things to generate push config to different types of devices, or make external API calls to cloud providers. We have integrations with most of the big cloud providers,
Hmm.
any sort of third party work. configuring servers, whatever it is. And as well as collecting all the metrics and everything that come back from that.
Do you make a lot of use of Python? Do you use don't tell me you're still using Perl. So
we do have a pretty big Perl code base, actually. Yeah.
If it works, yep.
It does work. Yeah. And look, that's largely because when we got started, we had 6 weeks and we had to do what everybody knew and what was going to be quick. And I think there are ways of doing it that work pretty well for this kind of thing. And so I'm not sorry, but I probably wouldn't use Perl if I was starting again from scratch now.
But you have your own legacy, right? And again, changing things in a live supportable network. You must have excellent documentation, right? So easier to bring people up to speed on the scriptorium as they come on board. So
yeah, I think the documentation's pretty good. Also, I think just the consistency, and I've talked about that at the network layer, but it's really important in the software as well. Probably, maybe even more important. And yeah, that makes a big difference.
I think we can put them at co-equal importance, right? For the network and the code base, right? Consistency, following, your defined structures and schema. That's key for extensibility.
Yep.
The last internal facing question I'll ask, or maybe I'll try to make it the last, aside from all your automation infrastructure or in conjunction with it, what other tools, technology areas, process areas do you think are critical for maintaining, what you're doing and making provisioning that quick?
I think in some ways, making it rapidly provisionable was almost the easy part, because once you've got it automated, that it kind of just happens. I've talked about the simplicity a fair bit, but I feel like I have to mention it again because that really is probably the biggest single thing, is just keeping everything consistent and simple. And you have to think about that not just at the network layer, but right from the product. It makes a big difference. Some other things, I guess, we tend to prefer well-established technologies over whatever's hot. Particularly in software development, I find things move fast. There are a lot of interesting new technologies coming out, but pretty often they don't. They fade out quickly, and networking, the reliability and the robustness is probably a bit more important. And so, using some well-established technologies is something that we've chosen, a direction we've chosen to go. And I think it's a little left of center maybe for the rapidly provisionable part of the question, but I think that the user experience in the portal is big. If people can't figure out how to do it in the portal, they're not going to use it, or it'll just take them a long time to figure out how to do it, and then it won't be rapid anymore.
Right.
So making the portal easy to use, and so that people can find things and that they understand the products. I think that's really important.
See, what just happened there was the bias of somebody who grew up driving a CLI didn't think about user experience, right? I'm talking about me and you having to call that out specifically, and that being really important for how folks use the network. And I'll use that to pivot back to Alexis, right? So you probably have to show, prospects and customers, this is how you do it, and this is how simple it is. What's that experience been like for you? 6 months in, you're
right.
You're a veteran now. You should know everything. Why should you ask Mitch any questions?
I've done the demo a handful of times. Yeah,
okay.
Scott.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, most of the time I just get, I can't believe you can actually do this. It's kind of like you don't believe it until you can see it. And they're like, this is really a production environment. This isn't just a demo. I'm like, no, this is production. This is live.
Yep.
Which if you meet with any of our SAs, most of them do their demos in a live environment, which is kind of cool. I feel like most vendors demo in a dev environment. So it's kind of cool.
Static, contrived, known parameter situations. Yep.
Right. There's no praying to the demo gods. It's worked every time.
Right, right. Well, you recently made the switch from coming from, a networking vendor, and now you're at it's a very different company, just not just from size wise, but mission. What's the change been like for you? What lessons have you learned, and what are you in the middle of? That you feel like you're absorbing.
Yeah. I say when people ask me how it's been, the phrasing I've been using is like a breath of fresh air,
Hmm.
honestly. It's things move very fast. Like I said, we have a small team. If you want something done, there's a lot of just go do it, right?
Sure.
There's not a lot of asking for permission or hitting a ton of roadblocks. It's okay, what do you need to do this? It's cool. Let's go.
Right.
So that part has been very refreshing. I do think that we're in a position where we're still putting the customer first, listening to them, right? Adopting what features they need. Um, and I mean, if you're doing that, how could you fail?
Right. Cool. Well, there's more to learn, I'm sure. 6 months, you're not exhausted yet, but
I
um,
feel like after this conversation with Mitch, I need to go brush up on my software engineering skills a little bit.
yeah, I actually think that's needed for most of us that call ourselves network engineers, right? The
Yeah.
whole software development environment, becoming more and more dominant with better and better tools, even though I might not need each new one every time it comes out, for Mitch's, comments. Um,
Well, it's very interesting too because I've been on this little crusade on the internet of making network engineering cool again,
yep.
and we keep saying that we need more network engineers, we need more senior talent, right? I get DMs all the time from computer science majors
Yeah.
where they studied computer science, they were going into software engineering because it's like this very highly marketable career. And then they message me and they're like, "Hey, I hate coding. That box with wires, what's that? What does that do?"
Right.
And I'm like, "Oh, we need you. Let's go get that kid that knows the fundamentals of Python and
Right.
just a little bit of automation and thinks that box with wires looks cool." I think it's a perfect combination.
I totally agree. And as someone again who grew up in a more traditional, driving the CLI and driving multiple CLIs for decades, um, I don't need to become a developer. You don't need to make me a programmer, but if I know how to templatize configs so they're consistent and easily reusable, and if I can understand how stuff gets stored in a source of truth, um, and how I can pull things from the source of truth to programmatically develop new configs for new services, and I can put stuff in GitHub, and I understand what CI/CD is. I'm still a network engineer, but I'm a
Right.
modern network engineer, and I know how to use the more fungible software-based ecosystem to do my job better. I'm sorry, I'm preaching. I'm getting off my pedestal
You're
right now.
you're also you're a very marketable network engineer because now you
That's
have more
right.
skills.
Yep. Yep.
That's true. Yeah, I've also found that you would still probably call yourself a network engineer there, but I think that we've found a lot of network engineers actually turn into pretty good programmers as well. There's a lot of problem solving skills and intuition
Sure.
that you get about how to make things reliable that actually carry over quite well into software development. Yeah, so it
That's a
often
quote.
works out.
That's going in the show summary, just so you know. So this hits on a really big topic, right? So if I want a job at Megaport, don't worry, I'm not asking you for a job from me at Megaport, but somebody's applying to Megaport. Like, what are the skills they should actively be developing? And I know you have different perspectives, but Mitch, give me your view, and Alexis, give me your view.
Yeah. Um, so obviously we still highly value, traditional network protocol knowledge.
Right.
We run standard protocols, and although we automate the deployment process, we still need someone to design and troubleshoot it.
Right.
And so, yeah, things like ISIS, SR, MPLS, BGP, those things are all still great skills. You need to have them. Something else, I guess, would be some experience with the cloud, especially cloud networking.
Sure.
We work closely with all the big cloud providers. It's a key part of our product, and so understanding that is really useful. And obviously that's a big part of our business. That means a lot of our customers are doing it too. So I think it's what it would be widely valued. Probably Linux experience, sysadmin or DevOps.
Sure.
We find that creates really good, well-rounded engineers and operators.
Yep.
And although maybe not every role at Megaport would be directly working on that stuff, if you know how to do that, it gives you a leg up on learning everything else. If you need to learn
Yep.
how to use Ansible, you need to be able to run it somewhere. So
Right.
having a bit of Linux and sysadmin type experience is super useful. And yeah, of course, some programming, software development, or engineering. As I mentioned, we have more software engineers than network engineers.
Right.
So it's pretty much mandatory now to have some sort of skill in that area.
Sure.
It's funny.
Even
It's
just
funny
some
you say
scripting.
that. I have people all the time. They'll message me on Instagram and say, Alexis, I really want to work at Megaport. I look at your job site every single day, but you only have software engineering positions posted. When are you going to have a network engineering position posted? And I messaged our talent manager and I told her, and I was like, hey, if you ever have a network engineering position, let me know. I get requests for it all the time.
I bet.
Yeah,
I bet
we
you
have
get a ton.
surprisingly few.
Yeah. What else would you add, Alexis? What from things that people should be skilling up on?
Yeah, I think Mitch covered from a technical standpoint almost everything. I would just say being flexible and being a human, right? I love the culture that we have here. I think that like being a culture fit in any organization is important too. The people skills, the technical skills are very important, but the people skills are too. So being able to be a good communicator, work on a team, be customer facing if you have to. I feel like it's funny, Mitch. I saw Alex at AWS reInvent, and he was like, "I never talk to customers. I'm not in sales." And I was like, "Well, here you are." So
It's actually something I
think,
miss about the old days of Megaport a little bit, was that everybody did
yeah,
everything, and that involved everybody
Mm.
talking to customers. And I think, yeah, it's actually pretty useful for the operators and the network engineers to get that experience.
yeah,
I totally agree. And having spent time as a TAC engineer has completely informed how I functioned as an SE and SE leader later than life. Like I really felt like that kept me very grounded with like real requirements and real problems. And your comment, Alexis, about being human, I'm going to take this towards the wrap up for the episode, but I'll give you here's where I was exposed as a human, and I want to ask you guys some fun questions.
sure,
I was in the middle of troubleshooting a BGP outage for an international carrier. I was one of two engineers responsible for supporting this carrier, and I made a couple mistakes during the maintenance window, and we had one of our BGP developers on the bridge basically said, he told me, "You're tired, Scott. You should just go to bed. You're not helping on this maintenance." And he was right. And he wasn't a jerk about it or anything, but it's like one of those human moments where, stop trying to be a hero. Go get some rest. We'll take care of this because you're only causing trouble, Scott. So, but outages and ops roles. This is the fun part. So, now's the time, Mitch. And Alexis, if you have something you can throw in here too. I'm not sure you've actually been in an ops role per se,
no,
but
I haven't. I had a little bit of a weird path, so
yeah, no, I love your story, right? Coming from aerospace, right? Um, but so Mitch, is there a time where you had that maybe you should have gone to bed moment, causing an outage? And if you don't want to own up to anything personally, you can mask it as this really crazy, interesting outage that you saw at one point. You don't know who caused it.
No, I've definitely got some. I think probably the worst ones, or maybe the more interesting ones, are when we've combined some automation with vendor bugs or something like that, because those are the ones where you can really break big parts of the network in one go. And yeah, so I think before I go to bed was a good lead in there, because one of these was pretty much exactly in that way. I was working on something late after, just trying to get a little bit more done one day, and we were trying to debug a problem with SSH, and we needed to turn on debugging to collect the debugging output. We couldn't get that over SSH because SSH was what we were trying to debug. So yeah, we turned on Telnet to do some debugging of the SSH session.
Yep.
And you think, obviously any sort of debugging sounds slightly risky, right? So we did a bit of testing on that, and we were pretty confident that that part of it was going to be okay. And but we had to do it across the whole network to catch this problem. And so we automated, turning on Telnet, turning on the debugging, running our test, and then turning it all off again. And we completed the testing. We did our debugging. Everything was fine. We'd roll it out to the whole network, do our test, turn it all off again. But at the very end, the last thing we had to do was turn Telnet off. And we thought the risky part was over. We'd done our debugging, all done. And so we ran our script, and that router's stopped responding. Oh, there's another router stopped responding. And it turns out we crashed more than 40 routers in the network because of a vendor bug that disabling Telnet causes the router to reload. So a bit of automation there sometimes can hurt you. And we've learned some lessons from that. That was a long time ago, but we do more staged rollouts these days.
Sure. Don't you hate it when non-traffic bearing applications take down the plumbing, right? The number one job it's supposed to do. Well, the last fun question I'll wrap with, in the days when you had to support maintenance windows, and you can answer this as a hypothetical too, were you music during the maintenance window, folks? And if so, like, what would you be listening to while you're rolling through the upgrades, while you're waiting for Telnet the router to come back after you turn Telnet off? You go first. Yeah.
I think it would probably depend on how well the maintenance is going. I think I'd probably prefer to concentrate during the maintenance window, but maybe for a pre-maintenance warm-up, I think I like something pretty fast. So my pick would be Rammstein. I like Rammstein.
Okay. All right. I've heard of, but I'm not familiar. My musical catalog is kind of stuck at Steve Miller's Greatest Hits Volume 1, and that really dates me. So, But Alexis, I bet you have a different musical selection. I'm guessing.
I was going to say, is it bad if I haven't heard of either of those?
That's fine. You've not heard of Steve Miller. Uh-oh.
It's fine. Sorry.
What would you put on in the background? Or do you just need to concentrate?
Man, probably something uplifting, like We Are the Champions, or Don't Stop Believing. Something along those lines.
Those are decent picks. Well,
those
you've
are
been
great
good.
Post-maintenance.
There you go.
You gotta have confidence throughout, though.
For sure. Something to inspire that confidence. Well, you have both inspired me in this conversation. I really appreciate it. And Alexis, I'll just embarrass you a little bit to say part of what got me doing what I'm doing with the show was watching people like you kind of putting themselves out there and not being afraid to just, share info. So I want to thank you for that personally.
Well, I'm glad you started, and I'll be joining you shortly. I had a conversation with Ethan.
Excellent.
Excellent. No, not to give away any secrets, but
what secrets? I don't know anything. But I really appreciate you both coming here, and Alexis for connecting me with Mitch in this conversation. It's been great. We'll find other reasons to have you on in the future, both of you. And for our listeners, for all the operators out there, thank you all for tuning in to Total Network Operations. We'd love your feedback. We have some interesting things coming to announce later this year. Stay tuned as things develop.
If anyone has questions, we'll turn them into TikToks.
That's right. Oh, excellent. And before we totally wrap, where would you like to point people to follow you and find you? Like Alexis, you just mentioned you're big on TikTok. Is there any place else folks can watch your material?
I post on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. I've slowly started ramping up on YouTube. So you can find me almost anywhere. It's the same username, digital.byte, digital byte. Right. Unfortunately, I was not able to secure the same handle on all of the platforms. So some of them have an underscore, some of them don't. If I ever DM you asking for money, it's not me. Clearly.
Okay.
I've been dealing with that lately, which is fun. And follow Megaport too. We're trying to ramp up Megaport social media as well, feature more engineers and architects from our company. So follow them too.
Very cool. Mitch, is there a good place for follow-up with you, or you want to point people to stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, probably just LinkedIn is probably the best way to catch me. Yep.
No personal email address, Mitch?
There have been some brave souls, believe it or not, but yeah, that is not the rule. That is the exception and not the rule.
It's reserved for feature requests.
Very good. Yep. Well, thanks again to all our listeners. If you've got important things to say about NetOps, or you want to hear more about what's coming up, contact me via DM on LinkedIn. That's where I do most of my interaction. Or you can send us a follow-up to packetpushers.net/follow-up, or fill out the contact form at tnops.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Total Network Operations.